Chapter 14. Cut. After market the following day, Kareen set off alongside of Boki and Malik close behind, and Drew last in line. The brothers were showing off the red hills where they lived. The ground rose sharply and the rocks were often loose, making it just treacherous enough to keep most of the island out. The sun had sucked away all the water from the recent rain. There was hardly anything wet on this island. Even the leaves on the trees hung limp. The boys shot down a couple of juicy pomegranates to help with their thirst. They crunched through the bright pink pomerac skin to the sweet white flesh inside, tossing the big round seeds behind them as they walked. After about 4, Buki spoke up. "How do you like your new mother, Kareen? She visited your house 2 days in a row. If she's there again tonight, watch out. She's going to take over." Kareen wiped her mouth against her sleeve. "She's not my mother. I run my own house," she said. Malik began to snicker. Buki answered, "Not for long you don't. Now if she were ugly you'd stand a chance." He tossed a seed and pulled another pomerac out of his pocket. "My father doesn't need her," Kareen said. "Oh sure, he doesn't need her. Who needs a woman, eh, brother? Especially a pretty one." "She is pretty," Drew nodded. "I heard my mother say so too. She called her beauty rare." Malik pointed to the sky and dove his finger down. Buki said, "My brother thinks you should be extra careful with this one since she dropped out of the sky." Kareen sighed. "How do you know that a woman won't scoop up the two of you one day? You could get a mother, too, you know." "I've told you before," Buki said. "We don't need a mother." "Even a pretty one?" Kareen teased. "Least of all one of those. The pretty ones are bad business." "Not all the pretty ones," Drew said. "But that Severine appeared out of nowhere. Don't you think it's strange?" "Why doesn't your father think so? And how come she isn't in your house making her own dinner?" The troubling little feeling in Kareen's chest grew again, but she held her chin up. "My papa doesn't think it's strange. He knows what he's doing." "The adults are always pairing up. It's truly sad," Buki said with a shake of his head. Kareen turned on him. "My mama and papa were together all the time. They weren't sad a day in their lives when she was, before she, well, they were never sad." "And my parents are together all the time too," Drew added. "They don't look sad either. What's so wrong with pairing off?" "Who wants to be with the same person all the time?" Buki said. Malik snorted and nodded in agreement. "Maybe nobody wants to pair up with the likes of you, Buki," Kareen said. Malik grinned. "Ho ho, you two are comic." Buki grabbed the end of Kareen's shirt and tried to pull her off balance, but Kareen twisted around and pulled away from his grip. He ran before she could give him a shove. "You're all by yourself and you're slow," she called, tossing her pomerac seed and dashing off after him. Buki and Kareen ran to the top of a high rocky ridge. Buki ran nibbling over the uneven surface, but Kareen was determined to beat him at his game. She was close behind. Suddenly Buki stopped. "See that?" he asked. "Don't try to trick me," Kareen said. She was nearly on him now. "No, look." He pointed into the valley at the white witch bent over what looked like a small iron pot. "Who is she doing, or what is she doing?" Kareen asked, stopping beside him and catching her breath. "I don't want to find out," Buki said. He narrowed his eyes and began to back away slowly. "They say she can turn people into animals. That's ridiculous. They say she's more than 200 years old." "Impossible," Kareen said with a laugh. Her laugh echoed around the valley, and the witch looked around, trying to pinpoint where it came from. Buki dropped to the ground. "You'd better hide," he whispered. At first Kareen didn't budge, but when the white witch began to turn in their direction, Kareen remembered that day at the river when the witch had called her stupid and told her to go home to her mother. A strange cold feeling came over her. She dropped to the ground. As she fell, a sharp rock sliced her leg open, and Kareen screamed as pain shot through her. Buki scrambled over to Kareen and put a dirt and pomerac stained hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. Once she stopped, he helped her back to the hill. Drew gasped. "That looks awful," she said. Kareen looked at the blood covering her leg. "It's not so bad," she said in a brave voice. But when she tried to walk without Buki's help, a jolt of pain made her cry out and fall again. Malik pulled off his brother's cloth belt to bandage the deep gash. Kareen would have protested at the dirty cloth, but words wouldn't form in her mouth. With the cloth tied securely around her leg, Buki and Drew ducked their heads under Kareen's arm and hoisted her up. They were going to carry her home. It was after dark when they arrived. Every step hurt Kareen more and more. She felt weak and cold. As soon as they reached the path to Kareen's house, her papa burst through the front door. He scooped up Kareen and took her inside. Drew and the boys followed to explain what had happened. Drew untied the piece of cloth that was around Kareen's wound. She tried to hand it back to Buki, but he held his palm up and turned his face away. Drew sighed. I told them that running around the island was dangerous, but they wouldn't listen to me. Pierre nodded. Thanks for bringing her home. Just lie back, Kareen. I'm going to go get some water to wash the cut. Kareen lay back against the couch while Pierre hurried from the room. That was when Severine stepped towards them. Let me take a look, she said. Kareen had not noticed Severine was there. As Severine came forward, Kareen's muscles tightened. Drew and the brothers took a step back, looking at each other with wearied eyes, but Kareen had nowhere to go. So delicate, Severine said softly. She put her finger into Kareen's cut, and Kareen howled in pain. Malik ran between Severine and Kareen and stood stiff like a guard. What are you doing? Drew asked the woman. Severine leveled an angry stare at the four of them just as Kareen's father returned with a clean wet cloth. Malik moved out of the way, but Severine stood her ground. Step aside, Severine, Pierre said. I know what to do to help, Severine insisted. She put her palm on the cut and muttered something under her breath. Kareen thought she saw Severine's eyes flash with yellow light. She screamed again. You're hurting her! Pierre pushed Severine aside. She stumbled backward as Pierre began to gently wash Kareen's cut. Kareen winced in pain again and her eyes squeezed shut. Papa, she whispered. She felt her father's cool hands brush against her hot skin. Shh, Pierre said softly. I'm here. You know I'll always take care of you. It'll be over soon. Severine's face was hard. She put her hand on Pierre's shoulder. You don't know what you're doing, she told him. I know what will help her. He shook her off. I can take care of my own daughter, Severine. Severine's eyes burned with anger until they shone like hot coals. While Pierre finished tending to Kareen, Severine looked around as if she didn't know what to do next. Her eyes stopped on an object around the room. Kareen saw that she had found her mother's wax statue. She gasped. Pierre picked up the cloth he had pressed against Kareen's legs. Sorry, he said. I'll be more gentle. Severine stomped to the shelf and picked up the hard wax figure in her hand. She looked at Kareen with her eyes hard and shining and dropped it on the floor. The wax broke into two pieces that skidded in opposite directions. Severine stormed out into the night. Kareen looked at Malik and pointed at the open door. Malik nodded once and headed towards it, waving for his brother and Drew to follow. Drew picked up the statue pieces and wrapped them in the end of her sari. Drew peered back into the room where Pierre leaned over Kareen with an apologetic smile. Then Drew rushed after the brothers into the night. Stop moving, Kareen, Pierre said. You're making it worse. He went out to the back to wash the cloth in a bucket. Kareen tried to lie still and listen, but there was nothing except the usual sound of animals in the night. Then came the sound of footsteps running up the path. She's gone, Buki said. Where? Kareen asked. We lost sight of her around a bend. When we got there, she disappeared, Drew finished. Malik spread his fingers wide and moved his hands apart to look like something blowing away with the wind. That's not possible, Kareen said. We looked everywhere, Drew said. She ducked her head and lowered her voice when Pierre walked back into the room. She wasn't up or down the road. Malik looked on the ground for tracks, but he could not find any, Buki said. Where could she have gone? Kareen asked. But an idea was already starting to form, and her heart began to beat faster. Malik turned towards the window and pointed out at the trees. Nobody would go in that forest, Drew said, especially not at night. Unless Severine is no body, Buki whispered. Drew pulled her braid through her finger and tugged at the end. No, she can't be, she said. Their kind can't come out during the day. The light destroys them. But what else can she be? Kareen said. I didn't believe in them before, but maybe she really is a... Don't say it, Drew pleaded, but the word was already on Kareen's lips. Jumbie.